They thought she was fragile, quiet, small, easy to intimidate. But when three seniors tried to humiliate her in front of the entire student body, they found themselves airborne, one after another, until the gym floor echoed with the sound of bodies hitting hardwood. What no one knew was that Amira Langley had been trained in judo since she could walk, by someone no one at that school dared to speak of anymore. She didn't want attention. She didn't want a scene. But that day in the assembly wasn't just about standing up for herself. It was about drawing a line no one dared cross again. The moment would go viral, yes, but the story behind it, who she really was, and who they had tried to bury, was even more unbelievable than the throw itself. Amira Langley transferred into Crestwick Academy on a rainy Wednesday morning, blending into the crowd like a faded photograph in a sea of color. Crestwick was the kind of school where students arrived in luxury cars and carried themselves like royalty in training. It was polished marble floors, a student body stacked with legacies, and a staff that turned blind eyes to anything that might tarnish the school's pristine image. She was a scholarship student, one of only 5 in the entire junior class, and her arrival was barely acknowledged beyond the administrative hallway. Her mother's application had been persistent, but her reasons had been quiet. New city, fresh start, was all Amira had been told. She didn't complain. She never did. Instead, she arrived with her hoodie zipped up, her eyes downcast, and a duffel bag that weighed almost nothing, except for one thing hidden in its base: a black belt, frayed at the ends, tied and retied by a man who had vanished 3 years ago. The whispers started by the end of her first day. Creepy quiet. Does she even blink? Probably homeschooled or something weird. The worst came from a trio of seniors who practically ruled the student body: Chase, Dante, and Ava. Children of board members and donors, they were untouchable and knew it. Chase was the loudmouth, always performing. Dante was the muscle, silent, but always smirking when something cruel was about to happen. Ava was different. Sharp, strategic. The kind who wouldn't throw the first insult, but made sure everyone heard it when someone else did. Amira didn't react to their games. She didn't flinch when Chase made comments during lunch or when Dante knocked her books down by accident in the hallway. She just picked them up, nodded politely, and walked away. That infuriated them even more. They weren't used to being ignored. They weren't used to not getting a reaction. And so they planned something bigger, something public. The assembly was perfect. Every student would be in the gym. Parents, some teachers, even the board. And Amira, whose name was finally starting to circulate in hushed tones for her quiet weirdness, would be seated near the front because of some seating chart fluke. That's when they decided she would be their volunteer for the student council skit. Something lighthearted, they claimed. Something fun. What Amira didn't know yet was that the skit involved fake applause, rigged microphones, and a very real moment where Chase would try to lift her into a fireman carry as part of the joke. They expected her to shriek, to freeze, to be mortified while they played it off as comedy. But what they didn't expect, what no one expected, was that the moment Chase reached for her shoulder and grabbed, Amira would pivot. Not just pivot. She would grip, turn, drop her weight, and send him flying through the air in a perfect Uchimata throw that would silence the entire gym. But that moment hadn't happened yet. What had happened, up to that point, was a slow burn of mockery, of pressure, of assumptions made by people who judged her stillness as weakness. And Amira had allowed every moment of it, because she knew that one day they'd stepped too close. They'd pushed too far. And when that moment came, she wouldn't just defend herself, she would wake the entire room. The morning of the assembly arrived with that strange electricity in the air, the kind of charge that made students restless and unpredictable. Amira could feel it before she stepped on a campus. The buzz of anticipation wasn't about academics. It never was at Crestwick. Assemblies were about reputation, posturing, and spectacle. The student council skit had been heavily advertised. Crestwick's Got Talent. They called it a blend of lip-sync performances, fake game shows, and inside jokes only the privileged circle understood. Amira, of course, hadn't been invited to participate, at least not until Ava, with that saccharine smile, approached her in homeroom. "Hey, we need one more volunteer for the skit," she'd said, her voice sweet but eyes calculating. "It's nothing big, just a little help on stage. You'd be doing us a favor." Amira had looked at her for a long second, studying the corners of Ava's mouth, the twitch of her fingers. She wasn't naive. She knew it was a setup. But something in her, something ancient and coiled, had stirred. She said yes, not because she wanted to, but because she had decided. If they were going to come for her, they were going to see what came back. The gymnasium was packed before first period ended. Bleachers were filled with students, parents, and staff. Banners of school pride draped the walls, and a massive screen behind the stage projected the name of the event. Amira was ushered to a side corridor with other performers, but instead of mingling, she stood alone, arms crossed, her breathing slow. Her hoodie had been traded for the standard school blazer, but underneath she still wore the close-fitting athletic shirt she always trained in. Habit. Readiness. Her eyes scanned the floor tiles absently, counting steps, exits, angles. Nearby, Chase and Dante joked loudly about showtime, while Ava checked the mic levels with the AV team, clearly running the show even though she pretended otherwise. At precisely 10 a.m., the lights dimmed, music blasted from the speakers, and the hosts, Chase and Ava, walked onto the stage to a wave of applause. The skits began harmless enough. A fake cooking segment, an awkward rap parody, a pre-filmed TikTok reel featuring teachers trying to dance. Then, the final segment was announced, Crestwick Gladiators, a mock talent competition where a random student would be brought on stage to compete in silly physical challenges. The moment Chase locked eyes with Amira from the stage and beckoned her forward with exaggerated drama, the audience laughed. Of course it was her. Of course the weird quiet girl had been picked. Amira walked calmly onto the stage, her face blank, her posture relaxed, but her shoulders were square, her steps controlled. Chase handed her a foam bat and instructed her to battle the champions, gesturing theatrically to Dante, who entered in full football pads for effect. She complied, tapping him once, which drew exaggerated groans from the crowd. "Oh, come on, give it some effort," Chase shouted with a smirk, turning to the audience. "Maybe we should give her a real challenge." Then he dropped the foam prop and lunged forward, not aggressively, but enough to grab her upper arm like a wrestler preparing to lift. That was his mistake. In a single, fluid motion, Amira pivoted on her heel, grabbed the wrist that held her, rotated her hips into position, and executed a flawless judo throw, a haraigashi, sweeping Chase's legs off the ground and flipping him through the air. He hit the stage with a sound that echoed. The room went dead silent. Dante took a half step forward, unsure, and made the fatal error of grabbing her from behind in a fake attempt to stop the bit. Without turning her head, Amira dropped her center of gravity, caught his arm over her shoulder, and launched him backward with an over-the-shoulder sui nage that sent him crashing inches from where Chase groaned. Screams erupted, not of fear, but of shock. Phones were out. Teachers were frozen. And in the middle of it all stood Amira Langley, unmoving, unshaken, simply straightening her blazer as if she'd brushed lint off her sleeve. The morning of the assembly arrived with that strange electricity in the air, the kind of charge that made students restless and unpredictable. Amira could feel it before she stepped on a campus. The buzz of anticipation wasn't about academics. It never was at Crestwick. Assemblies were about reputation, posturing, and spectacle. The student council skit had been heavily advertised. Crestwick's Got Talent. They called it a blend of lip-sync performances, fake game shows, and inside jokes only the privileged circle understood. Amira, of course, hadn't been invited to participate, at least not until Ava, with that saccharine smile, approached her in homeroom. "Hey, we need one more volunteer for the skit," she'd said, her voice sweet but eyes calculating. "It's nothing big, just a little help on stage. You'd be doing us a favor." Amira had looked at her for a long second, studying the corners of Ava's mouth, the twitch of her fingers. She wasn't naive. She knew it was a setup, but something in her, something ancient and coiled, had stirred. She said yes, not because she wanted to, but because she had decided. If they were going to come for her, they were going to see what came back. The gymnasium was packed before first period ended. Bleachers were filled with students, parents, and staff. Banners of school pride draped the walls, and a massive screen behind the stage projected the name of the event. Amira was ushered to a side corridor with other performers, but instead of mingling, she stood alone, arms crossed, her breathing slow. Her hoodie had been traded for the standard school blazer, but underneath she still wore the close-fitting athletic shirt she always trained in. Habit. Readiness. Her eyes scanned the floor tiles absently, counting steps, exits, angles. Nearby, Chase and Dante joked loudly about showtime, while Ava checked the mic levels with the AV team, clearly running the show even though she pretended otherwise. At precisely 10 a.m., the lights dimmed, music blasted from the speakers, and the hosts, Chase and Ava, walked onto the stage to a wave of applause. The skits began harmless enough. A fake cooking segment, an awkward rap parody, a pre-filmed TikTok reel featuring teachers trying to dance. Then, the final segment was announced, Crestwick Gladiators, a mock talent competition where a random student would be brought on stage to compete in silly physical challenges. The moment Chase locked eyes with Amira from the stage and beckoned her forward with exaggerated drama, the audience laughed. Of course it was her. Of course the weird quiet girl had been picked. Amira walked calmly onto the stage, her face blank, her posture relaxed, but her shoulders were square, her steps controlled. Chase handed her a foam bat and instructed her to battle the champions, gesturing theatrically to Dante, who entered in full football pads for effect. She complied, tapping him once, which drew exaggerated groans from the crowd. "Oh, come on, give it some effort," Chase shouted with a smirk, turning to the audience. "Maybe we should give her a real challenge." Then he dropped the foam prop and lunged forward, not aggressively, but enough to grab her upper arm like a wrestler preparing to lift. That was his mistake. In a single, fluid motion, Amira pivoted on her heel, grabbed the wrist that held her, rotated her hips into position, and executed a flawless judo throw, a haraigashi, sweeping Chase's legs off the ground and flipping him through the air. He hit the stage with a sound that echoed. The room went dead silent. Dante took a half step forward, unsure, and made the fatal error of grabbing her from behind in a fake attempt to stop the bit. Without turning her head, Amira dropped her center of gravity, caught his arm over her shoulder, and launched him backward with an over-the-shoulder sui nage that sent him crashing inches from where Chase groaned. Screams erupted, not of fear, but of shock. Phones were out. Teachers were frozen. And in the middle of it all stood Amira Langley, unmoving, unshaken, simply straightening her blazer as if she'd brushed lint off her sleeve. Students flooded the hallways after the assembly, buzzing like a shaken hive, their voices rising and falling in frantic disbelief. Videos of Amira's judo throw were already circulating. Some students had even slowed the footage down, pointing out her footwork, the flawless timing. In the locker-lined corridors of Crestwick, Amira wasn't invisible anymore. She was a question mark wrapped in silence, and everyone had an opinion. Some called her dangerous, others cool, but no one dared to bump into her in the hallways anymore. But Amira didn't bask in it. She walked with the same quiet precision, head down, bag over one shoulder, as if nothing had changed. Except everything had. Teachers called on her more cautiously. Students moved out of her way. Ava kept her distance, her circle now more fragmented, whispering with less certainty. But it was Chase's absence that left the largest hole. Rumors spread that his parents were threatening the school with legal action. Dante returned with a sling, but his swagger had evaporated, and he didn't meet anyone's eyes. Amira's mother asked about the assembly, but Amira gave only fragments. "It got physical. I defended myself." She didn't lie, but she didn't tell the whole truth either. Some things weren't ready to be said. That night, Amira found herself in the garage, unrolling the old mat she hadn't touched since her uncle's disappearance. She kneeled in the center, palms flat, back straight, and closed her eyes. The memory of his voice came to her like a wind. A throw is not about strength. It's about surrender, making them fall by their own momentum. She practiced slowly, shadow movements against ghosts, turning, sweeping, dropping her center of gravity in silence. Her body remembered more than her mind did. Every pivot was muscle memory. Every shift in weight felt like a conversation with her past. The world outside didn't matter in those moments. The hallway stares, the administrator's unease, the internet's fascination, none of it touched her here. Just her breath. Just the form. She was both student and weapon, and somewhere in that rhythm, she found calm. But as she stood to roll the mat back up, a knock echoed from the garage door. Her mother was inside, so who? Amira opened it carefully and found an envelope taped to the outside. No return address, just her name, written in precise handwriting she hadn't seen in years. Inside was a single photograph, her uncle, younger, standing beside a man she didn't recognize until she did. The man from the old training videos. The one her uncle never spoke about. Kazan. The photograph haunted Amira long after she returned to her room. The image burned into her mind like a phantom. She had only ever heard Kazan's name once. Muttered in a half-conversation her uncle ended abruptly when she asked too many questions. But now here he was, standing beside her uncle in a picture that looked like it was taken years before she was born. Her uncle, always composed and reserved, looked younger, almost proud in that photo. Kazan, by contrast, radiated a quiet danger, the kind of aura that suggested he didn't need to raise his voice to make people obey. Why was this photo resurfacing now? And who had sent it? That night, Amira couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, scrolling through her phone, trying to find any trace of Kazan online. But the results were scattered, conflicting. Some hinted at a former government trainer turned rogue. Others described a Black Ops operative erased from official records. No photos, just shadows. It wasn't until nearly dawn that she stumbled onto an obscure martial arts forum, where someone had posted a grainy video clip titled Ghost Protocol. The video showed a masked man demonstrating advanced judo counters, the background too dark to identify. But the final throw? Amira recognized it instantly. Her uncle had taught it to her on her 12th birthday. She had only seen one person besides him use it, her. The next morning, Sarah approached her at school. Sarah was a senior with a reputation for knowing things before others did. Her father was military, her mom ex-intelligence, or so the rumors claimed. "You flip Chase and Dante like paper dolls," she said without preamble. And someone noticed. Amira stared at her. Noticed. Sarah handed her a folded note. Coordinates. A time. "Be there if you want answers," she said before walking away. After school, Amira followed the coordinates to a back alley near an abandoned dojo. Inside, she found Sarah and a handful of older teens, none from Crestwick, running silent drills, exchanging words in short-coded phrases. Sarah tossed Amira a practice GI and said, "If you're here, you already know it's more than just a school. Crestwick is just one piece of something bigger. Spectre isn't dead." The word chilled her. Spectre, her uncle's code name before he vanished. And now, somehow, it was all connected. Amira started training with the underground group regularly. Sarah introduced her to Jules, a former national competitor who had dropped out of Crestwick after discovering what he called the pipeline. Flint was another, quiet, wiry, but precise with every move. Together, they formed a circle that operated beneath the surface of the school, far from the reach of teachers and administrators who pretended everything was fine. Sarah began to explain how Crestwick wasn't just a school. It was a testing ground. Students were being evaluated not just for grades, but for behavioral patterns, response to stress, and most disturbingly, obedience. "They call it the protocol," Sarah explained one night during warm-ups. "It's a program Kazan and Langley started before it fractured. Langley backed out. Kazan didn't." Amira felt a crack of guilt, her throat tightening. Her uncle had taught her to fight, to control her center, to never let anger take over. But he hadn't told her about this. Not this manipulation of young people. "You think Crestwick's top athletes get scouted by chance?" Jules asked. "You think it's coincidence that half the top tier ends up in defense contracts or private security? It's all curated." The revelation was staggering. It explained the subtle pressures, the forced smiles, the perfectionism that felt less like ambition and more like surveillance. Amira wasn't just a standout. She was a variable, measured, tested, and now, apparently activated. One evening, while sparring with Flint, Amira asked, "Why me? Why now?" Flint shrugged. "Because you woke them up. You did something unscripted." Spectre hates unpredictability. That word again, Spectre. It hung in every sentence like smoke. Amira wanted to believe it was all exaggerated. That Kazan was just some ghost, that her uncle had nothing to do with this. But then she found the second envelope. This time, there was no photograph. Just a handwritten note. "Meet me where Langley vanished." It was signed with a symbol, a half circle with a single vertical slash. The mark of Spectre. Amira knew where to go. The last place her uncle had taken her before disappearing was a tunnel beneath the old stadium. She packed her bag that night with one thing: her belt. She didn't know if she was going to fight or get answers, but either way, she'd be ready. The tunnel beneath the old stadium was colder than she remembered. The air smelled of rust and damp stone, and every footstep echoed like a whisper of something long buried. Amira moved with practiced caution, every sense alert, every breath measured. Her flashlight swept over old graffiti, shattered bottles, a rusted locker door long ripped from its hinges. This was where her uncle had brought her on her 13th birthday for what he called quiet training. But it hadn't felt like training then. It felt like preparation, like he was readying her for something bigger. Now she knew. She reached the end of the tunnel, where a metal grate blocked further passage. But someone had already been there. The grate had been pried open, its edges clean, not rusted. Someone had come through recently. As she stepped inside the chamber beyond, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, lean, face hidden under a hood. Not Kazan. Younger. Sharper. "You came," the voice said. "Male. Early 20s, maybe. We weren't sure you would." "Who's we?" Amira asked, adjusting her stance slightly. The figure stepped forward and handed her a tablet. On it played a video, grainy security footage of Crestwick's headmaster, Grayson, speaking with Kazan Rowe in an underground boardroom. The sound was muted, but the implication was loud. Crestwick wasn't just part of the protocol. It was central to it. The boy, who introduced himself as Cody, explained that he'd once been a Crestwick student, top of his class, until he'd found a hidden drive in a confiscated laptop containing student evaluations, psych profiles, aptitude scores, and a strange ranking system labeled phase clearance. When he tried to expose it, he was expelled, his records wiped clean. Now he worked off-grid with a few other former students trying to expose Spectre. "You're different," Cody told her. "They think you're a glitch. But glitches are where systems break." Amira felt the tablet's weight in her hands. For years, she had trained in the dark, thinking she was preparing for street-level threats, self-defense, clarity. But this was something else. She was in the center of a war being fought in silence. Cody showed her the next step, a black site storage facility hidden under a research building downtown, where physical files, experimental curriculum modules, and Spectre recruitment logs were kept. They needed someone who could get close without raising suspicion. Someone from the inside. "You want to break into a Spectre facility?" Amira asked. Cody smiled. "I want to burn it down." They planned it over the next several days, meeting in Cody's makeshift base beneath an abandoned metro station. Maps were drawn, entry points memorized, guard shifts analyzed. Cody's team was meticulous, but it was Amira's familiarity with Crestwick's patterns that gave them their edge. She knew how staff filed reports, when the system backups happened, even which security officers checked their phones during rounds. The black site facility was hidden behind a research grant front called Crestwick Advancement Labs. But once you passed the reception area and keycard-only access hallway, it opened into something altogether different. An underground archive of surveillance logs, student behavioral data, and training simulations that made Amira's skin crawl. Her part in the mission was simple on paper. Enter as a student volunteer delivering internship paperwork, distract the security guard, then unlock the access port from the inside. But when she walked into the sterile white lobby, dressed in a borrowed blazer and holding a folder with a fake logo, it felt like walking into a minefield blindfolded. She kept her breathing even, her posture relaxed, her face unreadable. Everything she'd learned from her uncle, every discipline of focus, redirection, and balance, came to her aid. Once past the checkpoint, Amira slipped into the lower levels with Cody waiting nearby. They had only 15 minutes before the internal system logs would register duplicate clearance. 15 minutes to uncover everything. The files they found were beyond damning. Lists of students categorized by resilience index, AI-led training simulations that conditioned obedience, recordings of simulated crises used to test reaction time and compliance. But the last file hit the hardest, Project Heron. It listed her name. Next to it, initiated. The room spun, but she caught herself. No time for emotion. They downloaded everything to 3 separate drives, wiped what they could, and set the room to overheat. On the way out, they nearly collided with a night guard. Amira reacted first, redirected his momentum, dropped him gently but firmly. No harm, just sleep. That moment told Cody everything he needed to know. She wasn't just in this. She was leading it now. In the weeks that followed, Amira became more than just a name whispered in the halls of Crestwick. She became a symbol. The footage of her judo throw had sparked online discussions far beyond the school walls. Some hailed her as a modern-day vigilante. Others speculated she had elite training. But while the internet argued, Amira acted. Cody's team, now calling themselves Ember, had begun releasing segments of the Spectre files anonymously to journalists and watchdog agencies. Each leak was surgically timed. First the behavioral grading rubrics, then the student manipulation trials, and finally, the crest of it all, Project Heron. The public backlash was immediate. Protests formed outside Crestwick's administrative offices. News vans lined the streets. Parents demanded accountability. Grayson tried to deflect, claiming falsified data, but it was too late. Amira had become the face of resistance. Though she never once stepped in front of a camera, she didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder. Within the school, things shifted. The oppressive surveillance thinned, replaced by hesitance, uncertainty. Teachers watched her differently now, not with fear, but with a strange mix of awe and guilt. Ava, once smug and untouchable, now sat alone in the cafeteria. Chase and Dante had transferred. The student council dissolved. But even in this apparent victory, Amira knew it wasn't over. Spectre was decentralized, and while their Crestwick node had been severed, the system still lived elsewhere. Cody confirmed it during their final debrief. Kazan hasn't surfaced, but sources say he's rebuilding. Different city, different school. Amira nodded. She wasn't surprised. Power never went quietly. The group disbanded temporarily, Ember scattering to protect themselves. Amira returned to her life, but nothing was the same. At night, she trained alone, her movements sharper, more precise. She taught a small group of students what she knew, not just judo, but awareness, resilience. She called it Balance Club. Quiet, voluntary, no banners, just movement, trust, and breath. One afternoon, while closing the gym doors, she found a letter tucked under the mat. No signature, just a message. Next phase begins. Heron's not over. You're ready. Amira folded it slowly. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere, Spectre was watching. But now, she was watching back. By the end of the semester, whispers of Spectre had reached other schools. Rumors of a girl who flipped her bullies at an assembly were passed from student to student, distorted by retelling but rooted in truth. And wherever the name Heron appeared, on a file, a note, a whispered conversation in a shadowed hallway, it carried weight. Amira began to feel the ripple effect of her stand. A transfer student from Edgewater High approached her during a student summit. I saw the leak, he whispered. We've started a group too. Different name. Same fight. That's when Amira realized. Ember had become a spark, but now the fire was spreading. She continued teaching at Balance Club, quietly adding more students as trust grew. But she kept her guard up. Crestwick administration had changed hands, but she didn't believe in surface-level shifts. Grayson had stepped down, but his influence could still be felt. Teachers were split, some emboldened to do right, others nervous, complicit in silence. One day, a new file arrived on her locker's top shelf. It was unmarked except for the word, Loom. Inside were profiles of students from another district, patterns almost identical to Heron's design. A handwritten note read, Prototype wasn't the end, just the start. It was signed with the half-circle slash. Amira stared at it, not with fear, but with a growing clarity. Spectre wasn't rebuilding. It was evolving. And so would she. That weekend, Amira stood alone on the training mat, the one her uncle had gifted her. She lit a small candle in front of the photo, her uncle and Kazan side by side. Not in mourning, but as a marker. She bowed, then stood straight. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protection, about standing guard for those still asleep. For every assembly, for every hallway whisper, for every student who was told to stay silent. The fight wasn't over. It had only changed shape. And as Amira stepped off the mat, pulling her hoodie over her head and heading into the cold night, she wasn't just prepared. She was already in motion. Heron wasn't her story anymore. She had outgrown it. Now, she was writing the next one. The final day of the school year arrived with little ceremony. Lockers slammed shut, papers were tossed, and laughter echoed through emptying hallways. But Amira's goodbye was quiet. She left no graffiti, No cryptic messages scrawled on white boards. Just a folded note slipped under Sarah's locker. Trust the wind. It always finds its way back. Amira knew she couldn't stay. The story wasn't finished. Spectre had scattered, but it was still moving through other schools, other cities, new disguises. She had no map, no official allies, only instinct, and the lessons etched into her every breath and movement. As she boarded the late train that evening, a familiar face passed her in the crowd. Cody. No words exchanged, just a nod. It was enough. She found a seat by the window and opened her journal. One final entry. I was never the hero, just the signal. If they thought Heron was their test, they failed it. Because I'm no one's prototype anymore. I'm the rewrite. The train pulled away from Creswick. Outside, the lights blurred into lines. Behind her, a school trembled in the aftermath. Ahead, something was waiting. And for the first time in her life, Amira wasn't afraid to face it.